All right, welcome back to Patriot to the Core podcast. This is Thad Forrester, and I've got with me today for episode 92 or 93. I'm not sure which one this is going to be yet, but we'll get that figured out here real soon. I've got Brigadier General Robert G. Armfield, also known as Gwyn Armfield, and then Lieutenant General Bruce Pfister. Both are retired. So thank you, gentlemen, very much for being with me today to talk about your book. I'm very curious, Bruce, what brought you two together to even write this book?
Well, originally this started because Gwyn was a wing commander. He asked me to come over and speak to people in his wing about leadership. And I did. And then as things went on, I had a book out, and then I rewrote it. The name of the book is Growing and Building Faith, Prayer, and Leadership, Revised for You, the Leader. And Gwyn was a contributor in that. In fact, he had many of the good ideas for how it should be laid out and so forth. So, and we got done with that, and we said, we ought to write our own book on leadership. So here we are.
Yeah, well, the book, I told you all before, it's simple. It's straightforward to the point. I love how it's laid out. It's very easy to read. You said you had that I don't know, the layout in your head for a long time. Why did you lay it out the way you did? Gwyn, do you mind?
Yeah, well, Thad, first, thanks for having us. It's an honor to be back on the podcast with you. I enjoyed the one we did a couple of years ago. So the book title is Lead to Serve and Serve to Lead, Leading Well in Turbulent Times. And that was, I think I picked the main title out, and then Bruce picked out the Leading Well in Turbulent Times. And, we wrote this starting about 18 months ago. And, it was COVID, and it was all this stuff's going on, and everybody's in the virtual workplace. And so we're like, hey, this is going to last for a while, just all the uncertainty of the world right now. So we really need to help equip leaders of character that are going to be able to lead organizations, whether it's military, private sector or ministry or something else, nonprofits. There's common attributes to leading in all those. And so we thought through, okay, hey, what are the simple answers here? What are the simple things to discuss? Character, communications, and then we develop some a little more advanced topics as the book goes on. But we spent a lot of time on the developmental piece of this, on kind of what not to say, and cut all that out, and then focus on what we want to say. And the idea was, I think the genesis of the book, we thought through the audience, and the audience is people who find themselves in leadership positions that may be technical experts or whatever, but they've never been prepared to succeed as leaders. They were prepared to succeed as a CPA or an engineer, but now they're leading others. And, Bruce and I had a lot of benefit of the military preparing us to lead. And sometimes you got dropped into it. Other times you get prepared for it. But as we, worked with folks in the private sector and the nonprofit sector, a lot of them had no leadership background at all. So the book's really written for folks like that.
Yeah. Well, how does your leadership and your experience in the military, Bruce, how does that really apply? How did you make it apply to the private sector and nonprofit? Because you've also spoken to many groups, and that you will continue to do so. So how does that leadership experience translate?
It's actually very transposable in the sense that the basics are the same. If you're going to lead, you need to create vision. If you're going to lead, you need to build a team or figure out how to work with a team that you have. If you're going to lead, you're going to have to be willing to delegate and give other people responsibility, and not be afraid of an occasional failure that comes along, which they will, because that's the way life is. So that happens all the time in the military. When I first became a squadron commander, I didn't have any training. They just said, you're a squadron commander. So off I go. And I'm flying airplanes all over the world. Okay. I had no idea what to do other than to inspire a vision amongst the squadron. And so that Gwyn, since he's behind me, the Air Force kind of got a little bit smart about that and instituted some pretty good leadership programs for people coming along to prepare them.
Yeah.
That one of the things I'd say is that the successful leaders, whether they're private sector, military, whatever, they had great mentors. We talked about that before we got started today. But if you look back and say, if you're when you come into the military, you're as an officer, you're a lieutenant, or in the Navy, you're an ensign. Those that had really good commanders that invested in them and taught them how to do things, how to lead, how to present themselves, how to be a small unit leader. Those folks tended to grow up and do well, and they stuck around. If folks came in and they had a bad first experience, in some cases, a lot of those, move on to find other callings because they didn't really, they were never shown the way to be successful. And although the Air Force and the military has a lot of leader development, formalized activities, I think the real learning happens from, the folks that are immediately responsible for you. And if they invest in you, you tend to do well. Conversely, you also learn a lot from bad leaders. I had a mixed experience in my situation. My first boss was not real hot. Matter of fact, I think he fired me for about 15 minutes when I first got there. I'm not sure how that happened, but I really didn't want to be him when I grew up. And then the gentleman who replaced him was awesome. He took time to get to know us. He mentored us. He showed us kind of why things are done. And a lot of those folks went on to do pretty well, because of those next level up leaders who invested in us. And I think the combination of the formal and informal sets you up and sets conditions for you to be successful as you move forward.
Well, I imagine you. Sorry, Bruce, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say I was very fortunate to have some good leaders for whom I worked. A couple of names come to bear. General Dwayne Cassidy. I was a wing commander under him, and he came to see me a lot in Germany because his son was in one of my squadrons, and they had children, and of course, Grandma and Grandpa had to come visit. But that was a good thing. He was a really good guy to kind of craft your style of leadership around. Another guy was a retired Army Lieutenant General. His name is Sam Wilson. He's since passed. Both of them have passed away at this point. But Sam was one of the original Merle's Marauders in World War II, working behind Japanese lines. And he had immense amounts of wisdom. And he did some really terrific things to help me along in areas that I was working in at the time. So I kind of lucked out. I don't remember ever working for a boss that I considered just not up for the task or abrasive or anything like that. But I will tell you one thing I always did. I always went by the axiom that bad news never gets better with age. And so when something jumped track, and they did, I picked up the phone and said, "This is going down and it ain't going to look good." And I was on the international stage, and because I was a wing commander in Germany at that time.
Well, let's go into that. So you kind of started talking about developing leaders, which is chapter 8, and this is one of the chapters that I know was one of my favorites, or one that stood out to me when I read the book. And you have a quote in here. It says, "Good judgment comes through experience, which comes from bad judgment." I guess you just hope the bad judgment isn't too bad. I guess that's maybe how it is, huh?
Yeah, I think, you learn as you get more senior that there's folks who did the wrong thing, but their intent was good. And they were trying to get after the mission, and something didn't work out right, but they were legal, they were moral, they were ethical in what they were trying to do. They just probably went about it the wrong way. And so I'll give you, I'm a prime example of this, because I probably should have been fired many times, but all for usually trying to do the right thing. And I had an event where we were trying to get the mission done, and I made some bad decisions as a young team leader. and putting somebody, responsible for doing something that wasn't trained to do it. And they had an accident. Nobody was seriously injured. And, I got back to the unit and the commander's waiting on me and he's like, what happened? So I told him and he's like, well, what did your non-commissioned officer tell you? And I'm like, well, he had left. Like I was the only one there when I made the decision to do this, And I said, he had nothing to do with it. And I was like, hey, sir, it's all my fault. Here's what I did wrong. Here's why I did it. Here's what I learned from it. I'll never do that again. And he could have really probably ended my career at that point. And he looked at me and goes, well, there's nothing I can do to you to reinforce the lesson you've already taught yourself. So we'll just call this good. Don't do it again. And don't ever put a young airman in that position again. And I'm like, yes, sir, I got it. And the grace and mercy he showed me when he realized, hey, I had learned my lesson. And he showed me grace and mercy and I learned from it. And one, I never did it again. And two, more importantly, I learned to show grace and mercy to people that did, dumb things by trying to do the right thing. And I try to teach that to folks as I grew up, and we write about that in the book a little bit. But that's the impetus behind the idea that we write about, that you got to let people make some mistakes and learn from it. And that's how they learn to grow and make good decisions.
Yeah.
As long as they're learning from it.
Both Gwen and I have had some good mentors, but I think he would agree that the best mentors that any of us have had have been senior NCOs, for me, without fail. And especially when I was in the special operations business, I wouldn't do anything without checking with the senior non-commissioned officer involved in whatever the operation was. And they had a great way of kind of pushing me in the right direction.
Well, as I read the book, the whole time I thought about me and how I can apply this, how maybe I have applied it. And so one thing I thought of, especially in this chapter, was most of the time in my career, I've never gone through some type of formal training, not even much of a grace period. It's almost always just been, here you go. We need somebody in this position. We got work to do and you're off. And so there's been plenty of times where I haven't known what to do in certain situations, whether it was a procedure, whether it was where to find the process, on the SharePoint, all kinds of questions, who to go to. And oftentimes I had to make decisions, and sometimes they were wrong. Sometimes you just ask around, you find the right people. But would y'all say that what is the best way? Because Bruce, you said earlier you were put in a situation, leadership position years ago where you didn't feel like you were prepared or you hadn't been trained, is what you said, I think. Is that the best way to get into a leadership position, or is it through a formal training process?
Well, it probably wasn't the best way, but I live by another axiom. If you're dumb enough to give me the responsibility, I'm dumb enough to take it. So I went in there and decided I'm going to make the best of it, and it turned out pretty good.
I'd like to share, talk about an experience in chapter 8 here, because that's one thing good that y'all both do is you talk about mistakes or failures. And I think people appreciate that, because if you didn't talk about them, obviously we all have them and have had them. And Bruce, for you said that there was a simulation failure with an MC-130 and an MH-60. Do you describe what happened there and how you felt after it?
Well, I felt pretty bad after it. And let me take the end of this thing first. I had to stay on the island of Guam 2 weeks after the rest of my team left for an accident investigation. And I made the trip back to the United States in the back of a C-141. And this busted up helicopter was in the airplane with me. But the way this thing went down is I was always aggressive. When it came with trying to deal with the enemy and really have a good element of surprise. And I had a great boss. His name was Carl Steiner. He was just terrific. And I had been listening to the reconnaissance people on the radio, and they said, well, we don't see any opposition force on this runway. And I turned to General Steiner and I said, they don't see anything. I think we ought to move this whole show up 15 minutes and get in there while they get in this good. Well, a couple things happened. Number one, my floor mic switch got stuck in the on position. So I'm sitting there with my legs in the air while an airman technician is unscrewing the floorboards and trying to fix my mic. But then we didn't do a good job at all of communicating the fact that we're moving this whole thing up 15 minutes. And I think what actually happened is one of the units, actually was the Army Aviation Unit, they just didn't get the word. And they were at a place on the runway where I'm sure if we wouldn't have changed the schedule, I'm sure they wouldn't have been there. But they were, and they didn't know we were really changing this thing. But the MC-130s, those guys got the word. They put the throttles forward and then came in there and landed on top of them. And I'll tell you what, I went back to the Joint Operations Center afterwards, and a real dear friend of mine, who was the commander of the Army Aviation Unit, came in and said, "Who's a dumb SOB that moved the HR up?" And I just said, it was me. He's been a dear friend ever since then. And I just told him it was my fault. And there's not much else you can do about it, except what I did do. I had a great influence over how exercises in the future were done. And so I helped design exercises where we were forced, or we should have, moved our time on the target up, and we practiced that. And so however many years later in Panama, we had exactly the same situation. We had to move HR up by 15 minutes, and we hit 27 targets all on time, all at the HR that was moved forward, and we had great success. So sometimes you have to fall down in the process to learn and gain experience and figure out how you're going to do better the next time. But the most important thing is to stand up and accept responsibility for the problem.
Yeah, I agree with that. Gwyn, should you, the leader, should you know all of the jobs of all the people that report to you? And then at the same time, maybe it's a two-parter. I've been in many situations where something needs to get done. The person who reports to me maybe is not available or not there. And, it's easy for me to say, hey, I'm the leader, I'll do it. Do you think that's the right thing to do as a leader, or should you learn more to delegate? And then the other question of, do you need to know all the details of everything that your people do?
Yeah, that's a great question, Thad. And I think, it depends, right? As we, the book, we start off with character in chapter 1, and then we talk, about how to communicate. And then chapter 6 gets into effectively communicating so that you create trust, up, down, and laterally within the organization. And that enables people to kind of have this bias for action and operate without you having to tell them everything to do. So as we develop the book, we kind of go with character, then communication, and then talking about how to build trust by communicating effectively. And then, I think my favorite chapter in the book is chapter 7. As I've consulted with private sector companies since I retired, the skill that I see leaders lacking kind of across the board is the ability to delegate effectively, like you're talking about. Do I need to know everything and be able to do everything all the time? The answer, of course, is no, because when you get to higher levels of responsibility, there's no way you can do that. I think that it really helps if you have some level of technical competence in certain areas, but the ability to trust your subordinates, trust your teammates to be able to do their job, and then be able to give them the good guidance in order to go be effective is the real key skill. What problem are we solving? Why do I need you to solve it? And, what do I need you to do and when? But then we leave the how to the individual expert on how to execute their task. And so as we, as you talk to big groups of folks, we'll, you gotta, am I talking to 5 people on a team I work with every day, or am I talking to 500? So the level of fidelity I'll go to depends on what the situation is. But, as Bruce and I say in Lead to Serve, the idea here is to make other people responsible for the problem, so they feel like they own the responsibility for getting things done. So if you're reaching in all the time, trying to tell them how to do things that's really in their job jar, you're probably overreaching. You got to keep an eye on things. You are responsible for everything that happens. You can delegate your authority to go do things, but you can't delegate the responsibility for overall success. So I think I'm probably more inclined to trust the people to do the job, set conditions for them to be successful, make sure they know when they run into a roadblock when they come back and talk to me, and then we'll do the right level of oversight on that. But if we've got the right people on the team, they're going to go out and execute the mission. And we write in another chapter about hiring the athlete, and training for skill, or hire for attitude and train for skill. And in a lot of cases, you can do that. Not always, but I think it's the attitude of having a bias for action and understanding what it is we're trying to accomplish and why. And people will go out and make it happen for you without you having to be there telling them all the specifics of what to do. If you find yourself in that situation, you may have hired the wrong people.
Okay.
Yeah, when I was younger in the Air Force, I got this message from some senior leaders that basically said, you need to do everything. You should be able to do everything that your subordinates do. And I said, that's one of the dumbest ideas I ever heard of. There's no way you can do everybody's job. You should be familiar with what they're doing and what the challenges and constraints are. But don't talk yourself into thinking that you can do everything that every person on your team does. It just doesn't happen that way.
Yeah, thank you. Anyway. All right, I wanted to move to chapter 9, leading in a crisis. This was my favorite chapter. And there's a quote here. You've got, your reaction to bad news will set the tone for how your team responds. 100% agree with this. And how you say that following a crisis, people will not remember how the crisis was resolved, but how you reacted to and managed the crisis. I wanted to talk about your experience first, Bruce. One of the ones that you shared was you compared the similarities, or I don't know if you compared them all. You just said there were similarities in the Afghanistan withdrawal that we just had recently, really, versus the Vietnam withdrawal nearly 50 years earlier. Can you share the warnings there and the similarities?
Yes. First of all, both of them were bad. Okay. Afghanistan withdrawal occurred without any planning in a very short period of time. The exit out of Vietnam occurred over a 2-year period, but at the end of the day, we got the same result. And the last people out of Dodge are the ones that are really hanging on to the skids of the helicopter with one hand. But Afghanistan, from my view, and Gwyn can tell you a little bit more about this because he had time in Afghanistan, lots of it, and I didn't have that experience, but it just seemed like we're going to get out of there. And what happened is what you'd expect to happen. You've withdrawn all the support you were giving in terms of logistics and air power for the Afghan nationals. In the case of Vietnam, it happened over 2 years. But the same thing, in 1973, Congress said, you cannot provide any more logistics or air support for the South Vietnamese. And the South Vietnamese did a pretty good job of fighting these guys from the north. But after 2 years, they couldn't hang on anymore because armor and artillery and all kind of heavy stuff was being moved at them, and they didn't have any air support. I mean, they had their own Air Force, which didn't really amount to a whole lot. Some A1Es and A37s. And what they needed is stuff that could go in there and really bust up the enemy very well, along with the intelligence and so forth. So the outcome was the same. Vietnam just took longer. And the last days of that were just as tragic, because you had people at the very end getting pulled off the embassy in Saigon to head out to the ships. And in the process of that whole thing, we had a C-5 full of babies crash after takeoff from Tan Son Nhut. And I was in the military airlift command center when that happened. I mean, that was a huge tragedy. But you got to manage an exit if you're going to do that. And in the Air Force and the Army and Navy had no say in that evacuation from Vietnam. It was a dictate by Congress. And so it happened. Now, in the case of Afghanistan, I have no idea why there was not a plan for a reasonable evacuation, a reasonable plan to get out of Afghanistan. It could have happened over a 6-month period if it would have been planned properly, but that never happened. And Gwyn, you know about that a lot more than I do, and you can elaborate on it a little bit more, I think.
Yeah, so that the context of this is a leader having the ability to have indications and warnings a crisis is coming. That's why we write about this in the book, is that you got to have the ability to look at things and kind of go, hey, I think this may occur. Of course, this is my own personal opinion. This we're not on active duty anymore. We're both retired, so it's just our personal opinion here. But I think that without commenting on, because I don't know, I was retired last year when this all happened, but just sad and tragic that we left behind some really strong teammates who we had fought, and many of whom had we lost a lot of really great folks there in Afghanistan, Afghans who were fighting for their national sovereignty and success. There's a whole lot to the story, but it would have been I think a better ending if we had been able to get some of our folks out that had been longtime teammates with us. So we did get some out. A lot of us were involved in getting folks out there in the last few weeks and last few days as things went down. But we bring this up in our book, our leadership book on crisis leadership, because there's crises that you predict, you should predict, and this is one that should have been predicted. But there's other crises that you don't predict, and they just happen. And we give a couple of examples of those as well. And you're in the case that with your brother's death in combat, we certainly didn't predict that, but we had a process in place. We had a way to handle those things. We had a notification process we follow, and we talk about that in the chapter about being prepared and exercising for those events. And I think that's something to take away from this, is that as a leader, you got to prepare your organization to respond to crisis. And in the case of the U.S. military with Afghanistan, the folks that went in on the ground at Kabul airport, I know many of them. I spoke with them right after they got back to the U.S. Like within a couple of days, I had a chance to sit down and talk to them about how things went there, and they were heroic. I mean, absolutely heroic operations, very, very tenuous, difficult circumstances that the military leadership that was on the ground there at the airport, solving a very complex problem. They did tremendous work, and I can't say enough about the Army, Marine, Airmen, and other folks that were on the ground there, working in conjunction with the Air Mobility Command to lift out tens of thousands of people, and then set up evacuation centers for them in the Middle East and Europe and in the U.S. And those are all I got to remind folks, the U.S. military is predominantly 20-year-olds, and flying the planes and making the decisions. Those are all 20-year-olds led by 30 and sometimes 40 and 50-year-olds. They're doing some really hard things. And they responded very well to that crisis. They observed, oriented, decided, and act, and, made the best out of it as they could, similar to their predecessors back in 1975 during Operation Frequent Wind coming out of Saigon. And frankly, many of us studied that operation, knowing that we would be responsible for similar evacuations in the future, but not at the scale that we predicted for Kabul in August of 2021. But, again, personal opinion and all within the context of how to develop leaders to handle crisis.
Yeah, Thad, there was a lieutenant colonel that was basically the mission commander. He was from the Air Mobility Command that orchestrated that whole airlift sequence out of Afghanistan. He did an amazing job, and that was, being who's going to be on the last airplane out of Dodge? That is the key question when you're doing an evacuation, and how you're doing it. So this young man did a marvelous job of that.
Gwyn, when you were there at my parents' as part of the notification party, were you consciously aware of your actions, how they could affect the other people with you or my family? And were you the most senior leader there at their house?
Very much aware of the implications, primary and secondary effects of speaking with you all, and the intent of the notification process is that we write about servant leadership in the book, but our job at that point is to serve the family of the deceased and do it in the best possible way we can. And one of the things that I think you can do is a timely notification, so that the right people are making the right notification first, so that it doesn't leak out somehow, and you all find out your loved one's dead in a way that's unintended. That doesn't usually end well. So we wanted to do a timely notification, but then we want to deliver the facts as best we can. And so, the folks who came up, Calvin Markham and I think Sean Gleffy were the ones that were there, and then other folks flowed in right after that to kind of sustain the relationship with you all as we went through the transload, dignified transfer at Dover, and then going into the memorial and funeral services. It's a grieving process for us as much as it is for the family. Not obviously not to the level it is for a loved one like that, but we love our teammates deeply, and we mourn their loss as well. So taking care of them with excellence is something that we put a lot of value in. When I came to your family's house prior to the funeral, the morning before the memorial service and the funeral, my mission was to explain to you all the details as best I knew them on the circumstances surrounding the death of Mark. And so I was on the phone with the folks back in Afghanistan the hour or two prior to driving out to your house. So I had the latest updates. I think we used a graphic, either a map or a picture, to kind of talk you through as best we understood the final actions as Mark engaged the enemy and then exposed himself to direct enemy fire to save his Army Special Forces teammate Calvin Harrison, and then what all happened after that. So my job was to bring you the specific details. I was the senior Special Tactics commander there at the house. The Air Force Special Operations Command Vice Commander, Major General O.G. Mannon, was with me. And so when we went in there, General Mannon looked at me and said, "Hey, you've got this. You've got lead on it. I'll support you as needed." So if you remember, Major General Mannon kind of sat in the corner, and then I led the discussion with you all, talking through everything we knew about what happened. And to us, it was important to do that. As leaders, we want to present, we want to build trust with you. It's the most important thing. Build trust with the family that, hey, we're being as forthright and honest with what we know, because that's what we would want somebody to do with me. I have two sons serving on active duty right now. And if something happened to either one of those, I would expect the same level of care and urgency and exactness in what we tried to, we did everything we could to make sure you all knew everything, good and bad. I mean, if there had been a bad piece of that, we certainly would have told you, because we don't want that to come out after the fact. So my intent was to be to communicate as effectively as I could, the information I had, build trust and confidence with you all. And then as we learn more information, we provide that to you. So you talk about, crisis event, leadership in crisis. When you're back in the U.S. and one of your teammates is killed and you're in the process of notifying that family member, that's a highly emotional event for us. Mark's death was certainly not the first, and it was not the last. And frankly, I unfortunately had a lot of experience with that, and I was pretty refined in my ability to share incredibly tragic news with people that their loved one had been killed in the service of their nation. And I got more practice and experience with that than I really wanted to have. But if something's got to happen, I want to be there as the senior commander and make sure it's being done well. And if any questions come up, I want to be there to answer them for you. And so that's what we did back in 2011.
Yeah, thank you. And I just interviewed William Markham, recently.
Charlie Mike, I heard it. It was a great interview.
Yeah, and he said it was a no-fail mission. Bruce, I wanted to ask you regarding leading in a crisis. You had a situation in 91 in the Philippines, Mount Pinatubo. You'll have to correct me on the pronunciation. Anyway, it erupted. It really, in some ways, it wasn't a surprise because it had been predicted. I guess they just didn't maybe know when. But will you talk about that situation and how you led during that crisis? You gave some really good detail in this one.
Yes, during that crisis, we could see it coming, of course. And I had a wing commander at Clark Air Base, Lee Hess, who did a phenomenal job up front of getting all of his family members down to Subic Bay so they could get evacuated back to the United States. What happened, of course, is yes, Mount Pinatubo blew up, and as soon as I could find a way over there and get an airplane and take off, I went over there, landed at Clark Air Base. There was about 2.5 feet of ash all over the airfield, and they plowed out about 3,000 feet for me to land. So the important part about that is Lee Hess had things managed quite well. The problem was what was going to happen next. And that what was going to happen next was something that had to be resolved in the international community. So you have all these families on boats heading back to the West Coast. So the first thing I had to figure out is how am I going to work with the air staff and get people to meet them and make sure they had enough money and a place to go. And then the other part of this thing is we had to evacuate Clark, and we took all of our flying assets up to Kadena in Okinawa. And so now you have a whole bunch of crew members and maintenance people up at Kadena. First of all, trying to figure out what's going on with their families, and secondly, what's going to happen next. And this is a long, drawn-out process of trying to figure it out. But what I thought was important is that I get over there and I look at everybody face to face and try and listen to what they had to say, try and answer their questions as best I could, to try and give them encouragement that, yes, we did have a mechanism in place to deal with their family members when they got to the West Coast. And then just almost as important was to keep the readiness of the wing up to speed, because we were one of the first organizations to go into the Korean Peninsula if war were to break out there. And so I spent time talking with all the aircrew and maintenance people, just answering questions as best I could. Then I went out and flew a night mission with them in the MH-53 Pavlo helicopter just to give them a boost of confidence in what we're there for and what we're trying to get done. Plus, flying a 53 was fun.
Well, one thing I took from that experience of yours is to get on the ground with your people, and you got there as quick as possible, looked them in the eye, you stood in the volcanic ash, you saw what had happened, and you saw their faces, and yeah, that was a big ordeal because so many other organizations and people involved, and then your people's families. Let's see, Bruce, did we talk about, by the way, so I know you have been recording the audio version of the book, so that'll be out soon, which is a great other option to have. Now that the book is fresh on your mind, or at least the chapters you read, what was your favorite chapter, Bruce?
I think I like the very first chapter on character because it's the bedrock of leadership and all the things that go with that. I mean, I really like the one on communications, and anyway, a whole number of them, but I like to start with the whole issue of character first, and that's what I thought was the most important chapter and why we put it first in the book.
Didn't you share an experience? This has been a little while now. I didn't write this down, but you talked about someone who was recently hired at a company that you know, and they were bragging about something they had done that was just dishonest, and they lost their job quickly thereafter. Am I remembering correctly?
Yeah, you're remembering that right. The CEO was Dr. Paul Su, who is an immigrant from Taiwan. And he's had, I think, 3 or 4 very successful companies. But they had hired a new engineer, and they'd searched all over the place for this engineer they needed. And they were standing around over coffee, and this guy was saying how proud he was because he managed to have a boat damaged in a hurricane. He took it back to Sears and said he received a bad product. And when Dr. Paul Su heard this, he said, "This guy's not ethical. He's out of here." And so the next day he was gone. So,
yeah, I mean, if they act that way in their personal life, they're going to act that way in their professional life too.
Yeah, I mean, the guy was proud enough of it. They're all sitting around the coffee bar.
Yeah.
He shares his story. I mean, that was crazy.
Gwyn, what about you? I'm not sure if earlier you shared your favorite chapter. You already said it, or if you did, will you repeat it or tell us what your favorite chapter is?
No, I like the chapter on delegating and feedback because I think we boiled down our experiences on what works and what doesn't work. Giving feedback's hard, doing it well is hard. And I think if more people did that, if they sat and looked the folks that work with them in the eye, on a consistent, regular basis, and leveled expectations. Hey, what does that person need me as a leader to do, and what do I need that person to do? We'd have a lot less workplace tension, and I think we could make folks more effective at what they do. One of the statements I make in that chapter is about I used to I had the privilege of working for a guy named Dr. James Roach when he was the Secretary of the Air Force. And he told a story of when he was in the private sector, going around and just, how do you run a corporate business unit of thousands and thousands of people? And he said the question he always asked him was, hey, how do I make you better at your job? I'd sit down with anybody and just go, hey, how do I make you better at your job? And I thought that was a wonderful question to ask people. And you as a leader got to be willing to follow up on that. If you can make a difference, do it. Don't ask a question you don't want the answer to. And I think that's a great point to equip leaders with. One of the stories that we tell in the book is we use the pizza story about delegating. And I've used that a couple times, and folks it seems to really resonate with folks. And the gist of it is that when I was in command of a special tactics group, we had a really great staff, a headquarters staff that was responsible for, equipping and organizing the Air Force's combat controllers and a lot of the pararescuemen that were doing combat operations all over the world. And the staff was principally civilians, a lot of whom were retired military, but I felt that my job was to make sure that I gave them really, really good guidance. I knew the mission, and if I was good at learning the people, I knew the people's capabilities and then their capacity of how much they can handle. And so instead of having the staff meeting at 9 o'clock, I had it like at 11 and said, hey, I'm going to bring lunch. And so I got this big old pizza and I brought it in, and I kind of, used it as an object lesson that, hey, my job is to cut this pizza into the right size pieces so you can eat the right size piece every day. And so if I cut the piece wrong and it's either too small or too big, and you're not able to eat it all, that represents mission that's not getting done. At the end of the day, I'm responsible for that entire piece for the entire pizza to be eaten. And if I cut it up correctly by delegating effectively, the whole pizza gets eaten and everybody does what they're trained to do at the level they're trained to do it. And but hey, if you don't do your job and you don't eat your piece of pizza, at the end of the day, somebody else has got to eat it for you, because tomorrow a whole new pizza is coming and we got to cut it up again. But there's men and women downrange whose lives are counting on us to get this pizza eaten every day. And I, hey, I bought pizza for everybody. I thought that was kind of cool, and I enjoyed the pizza. And so, but I used the object lesson, and it was some nonprofit organizations I've been blessed to lead. I did the same thing. I'd come in with a pizza and cut it up and say, hey, look, if I'm not giving you the right size piece of pizza, you need to come back and let me know. If it's too much, I need to know. If it's not enough, let me know, and I'll cut more up for you next time. But I thought that was a really good object lesson, and just the responsibility of the leader in delegating effectively. Mm-hmm. And as we get into it, the other piece of that is just the ability to get feedback. You learn to delegate effectively by getting a lot of reps in. You got to do a whole lot of it and then get feedback from your people on, hey, did I set conditions for you to be successful? Did I explain things clearly on what I wanted you to do? Did you have the resources you needed to get it done? But if that feedback loop doesn't exist, you're not going to get better as a leader at delegating things. And a lot of folks just frankly don't want to delegate. They'd rather just do it all themselves. Hey, it's too hard to delegate, so I'll just do it myself and I'll just work myself into the ground. And then, personally, they fail. Their work-life balance is all out of whack. And then eventually there's so much work, they're never going to do it all. And the whole thing's going to fall apart. So I think the ability for folks who've got some reps in leading, the next challenge is this delegation thing and the feedback piece. And what happened is we were writing the book, we had it all in the communications chapter. And we realized it was an important thing that we needed to really spend a whole chapter on. And I had a chance to read that chapter today when we were recording our Audible book. And I think we got that one pretty good. I think they're all really good. But like Bruce says, the character thing is key. You talked about getting thrown into a position when we first started the podcast. And I would go back and say, hey, your boss probably picked you to do it because of your character. Like he goes, hey, look, he's got the right attitude. He's got the right character. He'll figure it out. And I think that's how we make a lot of decisions as senior leaders, is that, hey, I'm willing to, be a judge of character and a judge of attitude. And if I get those correctly and I cut the pizza right, I'm going to base it on character and attitude first. And I bet that person's going to figure out the technical skills they need to learn to be successful. And I think Bruce would agree with me. In most cases, that's the best way to pick people to do hard things.
Well, you were very lucky. It was pineapple pizza. You're lucky you didn't have to eat the whole thing.
Yeah, there's a love-hate relationship there, I think, with a pineapple pizza. It's very what's that?
I love chicken and pineapple, man. That's my favorite.
Yeah, I think that's one of those that like right. Divides people. So in closing, Bruce, what would you anything else you want to say about the book, about the process? Because I'll have a link in the show notes. We definitely want people to buy it and read it. So what would you like to say?
Well, let me back up for just a minute. Gwyn and I talked about where we got our leadership training, and he had he came in the time in the Air Force where they actually had leadership training, and I had none. I got my real leadership training from a guy who was kind of controversial, and I think you had him too, Ronnie Heifetz.
Mhm.
Yeah, but I learned more about leadership in that 2-month class with him than I learned anywhere else. So I asked your question again. I got all out of whack here. I got a short memory.
Well, just anything in closing, Bruce, that you want to say about the book or the process?
Yeah.
Talk about the study guide.
Yeah, we got a new public study guide coming out here in a couple of weeks. So yeah, that'd be a good thing. In fact, we ought to do more of these podcasts. We'll just take you through the study guide. They're great questions.
Great. And I mean, if you want me to do it, I'll link it as downloadable. I don't know if you want that, but
It's not available yet.
Not yet. Yeah.
Yeah.
That well, I'll tell you what, Gwen and I kind of came together on this from, like I mentioned earlier, about putting together an earlier book. But we think an awful lot alike when it concerns leadership. He's had some, I will just say, some pretty traumatic times in his career where he's had to exercise leadership. Not so much with me, because at the time, I had good subordinate commanders that would take the responsibility and get done with it. And I think that's important. I was always there to support them, and I'd be available. When there was a aircraft accident someplace in my command, the squadron commander and the wing commander would have those responsibilities, but I'd make myself available to console with families or whatever. At least it's important that they know that the top leadership is empathetic. But we just saw things a lot alike when we laid out this earlier book, and we just said, let's write another book. So we did. And I think it turned out pretty well. So there you go.
Yeah. Gwyn, what about you?
Yeah. So, thanks for posting the book's available on Amazon. Lead to Serve and Serve to Lead, Leading Well in Turbulent Times, with both our names on it. And if folks like it, leave a review for us. That's always helpful, in the whole world of print on demand stuff. That's what drives it, I guess. But we just hope it serves as a blessing to people that may feel unequipped for the challenge that they found themselves in. And this is folks ask us, like, hey, what's a good leadership book if I end up in charge of something and don't know what to do? And we didn't have a great, singular book to point them to. So we figured, oh, heck, we'll just write our own, and it's 10 chapters. The last chapter is kind of a summary and an encouragement to folks to get after it as leaders. And, to us, it's, leadership is a service. That's how you serve your fellow human being, and by doing it well. And so we wanted to kind of give some tools and some suggestions on how to maybe consider it. But the bottom line comes down to, hey, the folks that work, we like to say for us, but the folks that work with us, frankly, you got to realize they're more important than you are. And once you come to that conclusion, hey, the people that I wake up every day to equip and encourage and inspire, they're more important than I am. And I got to lean into this as hard as I can to help make their lives better. And if I do that, things tend to work well in the organization. And so the book kind of lays out how you do that. And that's what we hope to do. And I hope the folks can, I'm sure a lot of folks listening to this are great proven leaders who could write their own books, but we hope folks are blessed by what we put in there, and it helps them do better. And it influences all the folks they touch in their workplace or in their nonprofit or, the ministry or whatever they're involved in. Because, we talk about, hey, there's positional, informal, and circumstantial leadership. And you kind of do all three all the time. I mean, you're always influencing people, whether you're in a formal position of leadership or not. So, we hope this helps somebody, just live their life better and make life better for others and make the organization more effective. So if anybody's interested in learning more, you know how to get hold of us, or they can reach out to us through our website. It's www.leadtoservebook.com. You can contact us through the website, and it's got some more information about us and about our book. So, hey, we're honored to be with you, Thad. Anytime we can be associated with the Forrester family, it's always great. And we really appreciate you, one, reading the book and then thinking enough of it to invite us on your podcast.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Thad, for having us as your guest. It's been a really great time together. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's my honor, and the time goes by too fast, of course, because there's plenty more that I wanted to cover. But for those watching, here's the book. It's a great reference book too, because this is, I don't even know if you have a hardcover, do you?
Yeah.
You do? Oh, you do. Okay. Well, I've got the paperback, and you should see it's marked up, all over. A lot of notes, a lot of underlines, and so this could be one that easily. Oh, there's a hardcover. Okay.
Yeah, this is a super hardcover edition. I guess you can get on Amazon. That we got a number of them that we sell retail, $33.95 a piece.
Can anyone get one signed? Have y'all figured out how to make that happen?
Yeah, shoot us a note through our website.
Okay.
It'll link to us.
Yeah.
Or if you got the best way, you go to the website, you fill out a thing, it'll come to us. So we try not to advertise our emails, but it's in there. So yeah, that'd be great. We'd love to get it. The soft cover is on Amazon for 19 something, and then there's a printed hardcover edition, but there's the author's edition that we can get you with the signature on it if anybody feels led to it. But yeah, we hope folks use it as a resource. We wrote it to be kind of a book you keep on the shelf and go back to, hopefully to, we try to be very succinct in our thoughts on that.
Oh, so yeah.
Hopefully folks will use that.
Hey, I've thought of myself the whole time through that book, and I've always been a big kind of self-help leadership book kind of guy, at least for the past 25 years. I know I've read many of them. So thank y'all very much. It's full of wisdom, and I highly recommend it. I'll have links to everything, and hopefully people will not only read it, but they will leave a review.